Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was created by Joe, who's an intermediate photographer from Georgia. Joe shot this with a Canon Digital Rebel 18 to 55 zoom, and the effective focal length used here is about 65 millimeters after the crop factor, so this is a short telephoto shot. Rest of the metadata, ISO 100, f/18, 1/6 of a second. I want to talk about some of this technical metadata in just a few minutes. Joe says this is Tangle Falls and Banff National Park. Let's get right into it. One of the things I really wanted to mention as a takeaway from the video today is that Joe is working with a really exciting quality of light here. We could call it Chiaroscuro, which is an Italian word which connects to sort of a cinematic lighting term where we work with a real dramatic feeling of light and dark. We could also talk about it in painting. And the reason I wanted to mention that today is that we can fall into the trap, following guidelines. I talk a lot about composition guidelines here. I just recorded a video about landscape photography where I talked about sort of 5 basic possible pitfalls and some guidelines for mitigating those pitfalls. But those kinds of things can be creative traps. And one of the traps we can fall into shooting flowing water is the idea of it always needs to be shot in quiet light, soft light, overcast, shade. And Joe here has this really beautiful spotlight effect, and what looks like pretty hard light comes in and it hits this ledge, skates across the ledge. Most of the rest of the face of this waterfall is in the shade. You start to get some highlights up in here too. So you have these spotlight effects that are coming in, and then areas that are very dark, and to me in this composition it's really beautiful. So one of the takeaways from the video today is you might really challenge yourself. Pick a subject that you're used to shooting one way in terms of the light and try all different qualities of light and see what you can come up with. In addition to this really exciting sort of non-traditional quality of light on the face of a waterfall, I really like the way Joe has come in and just captured a section of the waterfall to sort of abstract this and to accentuate what I feel like is the main subject. One of the things I love about the design here is that where the spotlight is hitting, that one of these rocks is the same color as the color that's in the face of the rock in a lot of places. That really helps to unify this composition. It helps to tie this area with the light in with these corners that are pinned out. I also wanted to mention that today. Joe has pinned his corners here. What do I mean by that? He really has very similar subjects in all 4 of the corners, and we call that pinning the corners out, and that can work particularly well when we push towards more of a square crop. Joe has more of a feeling of a square here. The square is not a dynamic shape, obviously. It's more of a static shape, and by that I just mean that all 4 sides are the same size in a square, and if we talk about putting a subject in the middle, it's going to be the same distance to all of the sides in the square. So we start off with something that we could say is static or represents formal symmetry. And so this idea from a design standpoint, when cropping square, of pinning the corners out so that all the corners are pinned in the same way, goes along with the framing device in a powerful way. I'm enjoying that in the image. Let's talk about a couple of technical things. Joe shot this at 1/6 of a second, and I think that shutter speed has done a beautiful job of simplifying the water. We've got motion blur on this water here, and it's lowering the contrast in this part of the scene. It's helping to accentuate the contrast here. So this one possible takeaway here, these shutter speeds, 1/6, 1/4 of a second, or even slower, can help us to simplify moving water. Joe has stopped down to f/18 to get to that shutter speed, and that's something I might rethink. On a kit lens like this that may not be the sharpest lens in the world, if we start to stop way down to small apertures for any reason to try to get more depth of field or slow the shutter down, we're going to get quite a bit of diffraction, which is an overall loss of sharpness. And I think you may actually be seeing some of that in the file. And my take here would be, if you had it, to use a neutral density filter to block the light and to shoot at more of a middle aperture like f/8, f/11, just depending on what the minimum aperture of this lens is. When I think about perfect world improvement for this image, there's one main thing that I think about, and there's more of a minor thing. And the main thing has to do with whether to include or not the top of a waterfall. And this could be another good takeaway for more beginner intermediate photographers that may be watching this video today, for a lot of you it's summertime. It's a great time to go out and get in a creek bed or stream bed and play around with shooting moving water and shooting waterfalls. When I'm shooting waterfalls, the vast majority of the time I avoid the top of the falls. Why? Because if I include the top of the waterfall, several things are going to be true. I start to finish the subject in a way that's more literal, and that can be more ordinary instead of pushing towards something that is a part of an overall scene and may be a little bit more abstract and may let each viewer have more of a personal experience with the subject matter. The other thing that's going to be true most of the time is if I go all the way up to the top of the waterfall, a lot of times there's a lot of contrast up here. It's not just luminosity changes. It's also the fact that what I see over the top of the waterfall may be very, very different than what's on the face of the waterfall. Most waterfalls are going to be vegetation free. The water coming down has washed all of that away, and so much of the time, particularly if we come in this tight, we're going to have rock and water. But what we're going to see if we show the top of the fall is vegetation. And because the vegetation is different, it's a different subject, that represents high contrast. We're also going to, so much of the time, when we finally do crop, create a very exciting negative space shape that could compete with the rest of the image. This is just kind of exquisite. In some ways it's a subtle effect because this light is just skating across these rocks. And so this now has, to me, has started to compete with the main subject. And I think that we could crop from the top. If I'm cropping from the top here, what I'm going to look for is to try to create a negative space shape that could do a better job of rhyming some of the ideas that are down in here, particularly the main ideas, instead of this big dramatic triangle and wedge that doesn't quite look like anything else down in here. When I look at all these shapes, they're boxier shapes, and I'm going to try to crop down to create more of a feeling of unity from the top and just get rid of some of that contrast. So let's get the crop tool. I'm doing this for the first time. This has been all in my mind's eye so far. When I get to somewhere right there and I start to see how these shapes are playing out, they feel very similar to the rock and these other ideas. And so now there is before the crop and there's after the crop. And to me, this helps to unify a lot more and really helps to accentuate what I feel like is the main idea. It's a slight crop, but to my eye, it makes quite a difference. From here, I think, there are a couple of other things that we might do just depending on our taste. We might open up some of these shadows areas a little bit. Let's just do it real quick. Let's go into curves, get the target adjustment tool. Let's see where these are. They're very dark. So we could come down in here. I want to overdo this. I want to pull way up. And then I'm going to fill the mask with black. Mac, Command Delete, PC Control Delete with black as the background color. B for the brush tool. Got a decent sized brush there already. I want to make sure the hardness on the brush is 0, and it is. I want to start at the low opacity 10%. And I could come in and just open up some of these shadow areas to slow the eye down a little bit in the darker areas. And I'm doing this to try and just give this a little bit more dimension. And after I do that, then what I might do, I'm going to open this way up down in here. If I open that up, then I might come in and get a levels adjustment and make the black point more dramatic and white point, way overdo it. Again, same thing. Fill the mask with black and then come in at 10% and pop this out even a little bit more. Now that I've opened up some of those shadows, sort of accentuate the spotlight effect moving across there. And that's what that looks like. Here's the changes that we just did. It's subtle, but I like the idea of slowing the eye down in some of those shadow areas, and then after doing that, kind of popping the spotlight back and back in the image. One of the other things I love about this image is once I've cropped down from the top, from a color standpoint, you get this really sort of beautiful sense of all of these earth tones. And then the most exciting color in the image is also where the light is the most exciting, and this really starts to become simplified, at least to my way of thinking about the image, as the main subject. And when I look here, now when I look at all of the sort of shapes that are being implied, to me they're shapes, like I said, that are boxier shapes, more of a feeling of rectangle or boxy shapes that go along with each other relative to the original crop. Let's go back to where Joe started, which is awesome. really interesting and beautiful and dramatic quality of light on a waterfall. Definitely wanted to reemphasize that as a big takeaway from the video today, and just this thought about whether we include the top of the waterfall or not. And want to say a big thank you to Joe for sharing this image with us, and want to say a big thank you to you for being here. I hope to see you again real soon on another episode of the Daily Critique.